Today on Belonging in Classrooms, we will get to talk to parent leader Lara Bergman. We're going to learn a little bit about how she sees leadership. What can a caregiver do to support a public school, especially Minneapolis public schools? What are the roles? What are the places? What do you do when you're overwhelmed and you want to help, but you have no idea how? How did she get started in being a parent leader and parent advocacy work in public schools? You're going to learn that and so much more. I can't wait for you to meet today Lara Bergman on Belonging in Classrooms. Lara, welcome to Belonging in Classrooms.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about who you are, where your kids go to school, why Minneapolis Public Schools.
Yeah. I have two kids that attend Armitage Elementary. We moved into the neighborhood 10 years ago because of the school. But I am a Minneapolis public school graduate, attending all the way, first through 12th grade, and grew up not far from Armitage. And so when I became a parent in the district again, Armitage was now a community school because of the CDD, and our family values at the time was really looking for ways to really connect with our community, build relationships with our community. And that was the year of the historic teachers strike. And it was a real crash course in kind of looking behind the curtain. And I had a great experience. I have very fond memories from my time as a Minneapolis public school student. But being a parent, I quickly began to understand that, the adults in the room are the ones that really have the power to impact the experiences that our students are having. And that's everyone from, parents and caregivers that want to volunteer in the classroom, to the teachers in the classroom, the principals, all the way up to the superintendent and the board. So I started getting really interested in sort of organizing parents to advocate for more funding for our schools, while also understanding more and more like what the role of the board was in negotiating that contract with the teachers, and just getting a better sense of what Minneapolis Public Schools really needs to thrive.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think we met very soon or around the day that you were organizing folks at the Capitol.
We actually had a conversation on the phone
That's right.
during the strike.
That's right.
And, there were a lot of things happening during that strike. We're coming out of the pandemic. There's, George Floyd and all of the things that is happening in our city. Everyone's emotions were running really, really high.
Really high.
And, I was looking for community. I was trying to find my people. And I remember that first conversation on the phone with you because, you were advocating for, teachers of color, protections for teachers of color in the teacher contract. And, there's some pushback against that. I was trying to understand why. So I was kind of like, who is this person? Like, why do so many people, have all these opinions about her? She seems smart. She seems to be saying the right things. And then fast forward, I think we actually had a coffee. You agreed to meet with me and talk about organizing because I've always kind of felt this pull. But then, course, at the Capitol is when we really, I think, saw each other for what, the work that we're trying to do, kind of the bigger picture.
Did you have any imposter syndrome about organizing a day at the Capitol for more funding, or did you just know for sure? Like, I think one of the themes I kind of want to talk about with you is the fact that, like, sometimes we're parents and we feel like we're not professionals, or who am I to ... right? And then there are other moments where we're like, oh, well, I could do this.
Yeah.
I could do this to support these people in this institution that I love and want to be successful. Did you have a sense of like, oh, I sure know how to organize a lobby day? Or was it like, oh, who am I to?
Two things that come to mind. First of all, that fall, our first year at Armitage, the PTA, because of the CDD, was all new members. And so we'd lost kind of that institutional memory of like who the PTA is, what their role is in the school. But they wanted an equity committee. And at first I was very reluctant to say that, because I think in a lot of majority white spaces, there's still some, misunderstanding and lack of clarity about what equity really means. But after, a couple months rolled by and no one was stepping up to do this, I was like, fine, I will.
That's how most public school parent jobs get solidified.
I'll lead it because that is an interest of mine. When we're talking about education, equity is a big piece of that. I'm also an early childhood educator, so this is just my a passion, I guess. But so I just always am finding myself stepping up into things that needs that I see, and no one else is taking the helm, and so I'm like, well, I guess I'm just gonna do it. Ask my husband. He would be able to be like, this is why, and so, and then secondly, I love being at the Capitol. Growing up, my mom, worked as part of the nonpartisan staff. I remember, going to, at the time was called Take Your Daughter Work Day, and, just being there with her. And then, field trips to the Capitol when I was a student. And then, in my junior year of high school, I did a week-long PAGE program. And so I've always just loved that. I think it's a really, incredible place to be. And here in Minneapolis, we live so close to the Capitol.
I know.
It's really
We're really
easy,
lucky.
right? So I don't know. I didn't have imposter syndrome. I think that year, my big thing was bringing letters from the Armitage 4th and 5th grade students and delivering them to the governor and our representatives and our senators. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the kids. There's so much hope and promise that they bring. And, so just, if that is why I'm moving forward, is if that's the point of my leadership, is to bring people along in support of our children, it's really easy for me to do.
Okay. What do you think MPS now? I don't necessarily mean this in the fiscal part, but lots and lots of people have big ideas about education and urban education, all these, and lots of and all that. What do you think MPS needs from its parents right now?
So there is, I just, wrapped up a 10-month school board campaign.
Yep.
Don't need to, rehash that here. But what I found was, there is very much a role for parents and a need for parents, but that parents don't know where to start.
That's so true.
I remember talking early on to a supporter who's done similar organizing of Barton families, and he said, parents just feel like this district is so dysfunctional that they just pour into what they can do for their school. That's
so true. That is so true.
And so we have, tons of parents in this school district that want to be engaged, that want to advocate for their kids, that want to support our teachers, that want to support our schools. They just don't know where to start. And so I think that, and the work of the board in particular, whether it's budget or policy work, it's kind of dizzying. It's hard to understand.
It is hard
even
to
if you want to and you spend the time doing it. That first year I was organizing parents. And that's why one of the reasons I love to continue to share what I learned in that year is we need to come together around having a shared vocabulary, an understanding of, how we can get things done through community. And I think that we have parents that want to be involved. They just need to know how, and then how can we push them beyond that thinking of just my kid,
just my school. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, and this is what we're seeing in Minneapolis right now, is what affects one part of the system is going to impact the entire system. I'm thinking about class sizes, right? We're in this position because we have an unsustainable system, and it's impacting every single school.
It is
in this district.
Yes.
And it's kind of how did we get here, right? So parents want to be involved, and I think that there are people ready and waiting. They just need to know they either need like to know how to move forward, or they need someone to step up and, tell
Say,
them,
here's where we're going. Here's what job
here's
you
the
can do.
vision.
Yeah.
What is the vision that we're collectively aiming towards? Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think, what do you, and then I'm kind of like, how could Minneapolis Public Schools as a district, like, give parents more of an inroad to that? Do you think it's like sharing more information with us? Do you think it is like, what do you think that wall is that none of us can seem to get over? I mean, I certainly I feel like I know a fair amount of district people. I feel like I know a fair amount of schools, but I'm often shocked by the walls that go up in places that surprise me. Mm-hmm. And what do you think's behind that?
I mean, ultimately, everything comes down to power.
Yeah.
I'm a kind of person that really, really does believe that, ultimately we're all trying to do good, know. But
I think you're a little more rosy than I am on that one.
I know. And I just, life has tried to, stomp me down, and I just keep popping back up. So I think of a story last spring. Gosh, what is time? When the superintendent was doing her listening sessions, and I attended the one at Justice Page, and I think it was one of the last ones that she did. So, whether or not they really iterated their process, I don't know. I just saw what this one was like. And I found it really interesting because we were so excited. There was all this is the first time we've had a superintendent with a 100-day plan, and she's doing, it was a big lift by her staff.
It was a big lift by her
time
staff.
And organizing, and this one at JPMS was very well attended. But there was a district person, someone from her cabinet, that was sort of facilitating the conversations at each table. And at my table, a theme that bubbled up, and this may surprise some people, it wasn't me that brought up, the conversation around closing schools. Mm-hmm. And there were a few parents that were talking about, we need to start talking about this. We want our leaders to start telling us, how is this going to work? And, the district's person was taking notes because they were going to code all this data later and all this stuff. But then there was, after each question, the opportunity to share out to the large group. And this is I don't know, 75 people in this lunchroom maybe. Mm-hmm. And when it came time for that district person to report out to the large group, they said, our table talked about sustainability. And I was like, I mean, that falls under the umbrella. But what that did was take away the power of, first of all, what those few parents were saying, and then also any other parent in that room that maybe had that same question or that same feeling, they didn't get that acknowledgement that there are other people talking about this too. Mm-hmm. Right? And they're not crazy. They're not. And so I think that that is always going to be a barrier until we have leadership that's courageous enough to say the hard thing. I believe very much that when we go through a hard thing, the repair is really important to that relationship.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of things in this district that have been hard since I've been a parent. Yes. And, predating that really. And there's just never been any ownership of that harm and hurt that has been caused. Yes. That has eroded away our community's trust in our district and board leadership. And we can't just move on, right? We need to really create a culture where people feel like their input is not only heard, but like used to inform. They do all the listening sessions, right? All the community engagement. Show us how you're going to use that. Otherwise, people are going to go back to their silos and be like, I keep showing up and nothing changes. So I'm going to go to where I feel like I have the power to actually influence something.
I mean, yeah. And that was what I experienced. I went to the Bethune's listening session night. It was very similar. There was one person there. And you know, it reminded me of church. Right? Like I wasn't in control when I went to church of like my relationship with God. There was this man who told us what a good person looked like. Right. And so I think power. And then I think trust is mutual. Our families will trust the district when the district trusts our families.
Exactly.
And so I think that there's some mutual trust. And I also think it's pretty easy to build. I think if we both want to do it, we could do it. Right. And then I think it takes some parents willing to like walk across the aisle, see experiences, because what we are is one district with two very different realities based on zip code and race. And we are living as if that's not real every day.
Yeah.
And the thing that drives me and that keeps me going in the work is that kids only get one childhood.
Yeah. I mean, as an early childhood teacher, I'm like, this is just as important as a pilot flying an airplane, right? Like if this plane goes down,
yes,
that's the end, right?
You mean public schools?
Yeah. Education is just like, it is so important to, you know, the future for our individual students, for our, you know, community, for our democracy. And so we have to invest in it and we have to really come together. We're not going to always agree on everything.
No.
And, you know, another thing, a mantra that I try to live by and try to instill into my kids is, when somebody tells you their truth, believe them. Yeah. It doesn't have to be your truth. It doesn't have to be your lived experience for it to be true. So, you know, listening to the, you know, widespread, diverse experiences of children and families in our district, I think is also a really important part of how we're moving forward together.
Yep.
And that, you know, families in Southwest Minneapolis need to hear over and over again the stories of what's happening in Northside or high poverty schools. They're not all in North, but, you know, and not to pity them, but to get back to that point of like, when I'm advocating for something at my school for my kid, I have the power to advocate for that for all kids in every school in this district.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think and also I have to acknowledge that when my kids were at Lindale and I did my very first round of public school advocacy, I did it just for Lindale, right?
You got to start somewhere.
You got to start where you start.
Yeah.
So for the parents who are listening, just think about it this way. Like, we are a finite system with finite resources. And when you ask for something for your child's school, it has to come from somewhere. And once you frame it in that perspective, then what you're asking for becomes bigger than like a teacher, right? It becomes bigger than one class size for your kid. Because as soon as you see that, and also, by the way, then you have more power, and then you're really being with other parents and not going to, you know, fighting with other parents. That I've done that. I never want to do it again.
Yeah. And I think there's an opportunity right now in Minneapolis and probably beyond, to really build a coalition. And coalitions, again, they don't agree on everything else. It's like there's a mutually beneficial thing that you're going to come together and work towards. And, you know, that vision of what we're working towards for public schools, for Minneapolis public schools, is where I think it would be pretty easy to put that together. Yes. The details kind of fall away, right? And and it's just like, what do we want to be true for every child in every school in this district? And, you know, putting that vision together without pitting people against each other. Again, I think it goes back to like, you know, my corner of the city, there are also needs there.
There are
and
needs.
we can't like say your needs aren't as important, right? That's not equity to me either.
Yeah.
Right? Of, saying we have to be really honest. We have to, remember our humanity. And again, at the end of the day, it's our children, right? If we can all come together and say, like, this is not okay for my child, so it should also not be okay for this to be the reality for a child in a building that I may never know, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, for talking about leadership, for sharing the lessons you've learned in the last few months, for being a parent in this district who thinks about it both with passion and love and deep hope, and also support.
Well, thank you so much for just having me on. Yay.